All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight. My name is Tyson Bankert. I am the BLAC capacity community developer with CommunityWise. I'll start us off with a land acknowledgement, and then we will get into the rest of the evening. Welcome. I'm located in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. Mohkinstsis, or the city of Calgary, is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. We acknowledge First Nations and traditional territories because the purpose of us here today is about sharing space, and because it is one way to locate ourselves in the process of healing from colonial violence. I understand that colonialism is rooted in white supremacy, and we aim to make this space as accessible for Indigenous peoples alike. I also, over the last couple of weeks, I encourage folks to, if you want to begin creating some of moments of change here, is around, if you're based in Calgary, and even if you're not, to get behind the movement around the name change of Langevin School is something that I'm a part of, and if you'd like more information about that, you can reach out to myself as well. We'll do a quick round of introductions. As I said, my name is Tyson Bankert. My pronouns are he, him. I am currently employed with CommunityWise and to help build the capacity around anti-racism work internally and externally with various organizations here in Calgary. I will then turn to Julie, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Alati-it. My pronouns are she, her, yeah. I'm here actually representing Bahaghari and just helping support this event.
I would love to hear from Kinya, actually. So Kinya, go ahead.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kinya Baker. My pronouns are she and her. I am actually dialing in from Treaty 13, Toronto, the 6th. If there's anybody out there from there, give me a big holla. I am here representing Shades of Humanity Consulting, which is my consulting firm, which is an EDI firm in Alberta and in Ontario. And I'm also a member of BLAC and happy to be under the leadership of Tyson as part of that group. And I'm super excited to be here today and to support the communication that's happening here and to help moderate this conversation. Thank you.
I can go next. My name is Wunmi Idowu. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founder and director of Woezo Africa Music and Dance Theatre Incorporated. I'm also a member of BLAC, the Cultural Instigators, and the CADA Working Group. And I'm happy to be here and to be able to learn with all of you. Thank you.
All right. And there's also a couple other phenomenal individuals helping us on the back end as well. And so I want to thank Tara and jaqs for supporting us as well. I wanted to first of all acknowledge the fact that for most of us, this platform, being on Zoom or other video conferencing, can be really, at this point, I know for myself, a difficult process to engage in, and I completely understand as well if you have distractions as well. Feel free to step away if you need to, whether that's your dogs, children, doorbell, or just simply needing time to just look away from the screen, and maybe it just means listening. And so in this process, to please take care of yourself as it relates to Zoom fatigue, but also because of that, of where we are right now within these online environments, we want to begin to talk about what are some of the ramifications, I think, of being online, specifically for racialized individuals, and creating a healthy space and a protective space for racialized individuals. And so there are going to be a myriad of different ways that we want to talk about this discussion. But the first part here is we actually want to bring up a poll that asks the question: have you witnessed or encountered online harassment? And we're going to talk about online harassment or along sort of the spectrum, I guess, of its impact throughout this evening. And so if you wanted to sort of enter in there what that means for you, that question, feel free to do so.
There's a question around, can we clarify what we mean by online harassment, Tyson?
Yeah, well, we thank you. That's actually a really great comment. Well, we have some experience, some personal experiences that we're going to talk about today that will be part of what online harassment can look like, which is intentional derogatory discrimination towards someone, specifically in this case around someone's race. But then we also want to talk about on the other end of that spectrum, and not to minimize the emotion and impact of that. But online harassment can also look like, which we may refer to as bullying, or even moments where you feel unsafe online as relates to what is even being posted, whether that's directly or indirectly towards you or the community that you represent. And we'll talk about the facet of all of that this evening. Thank you for that question. I hope that helps. So it looks like here, many of us have witnessed and encountered online harassment, and thinking about, was there a contingency plan, alternative plan of action when it happened? Many of us here are saying no. And this question is really based on why we want to begin having this discussion, especially now with how we are online more often than we ever have been, or more than we might like to. And that blurring between public and private and online, I believe, is something that needs to be discussed, and hopefully this conversation will help to provide you with some ways to begin thinking about how you want to facilitate online and even in private and public spaces. Have you prepared contingency plans for online events? Great. It looks like a few more people have been thinking about that as well. And at the end of this session, we'll go into also some of the things that we had to think about as well as it relates to this particular event specifically. So I did want to just pass it off to Julie to talk a little bit about how we want to treat each other with our group agreements.
Thanks, Tyson. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Oops, just a sec. I just need to let you know that my kids are in the room, so you can hear them. You'll probably hear them. They may not make an appearance, but you might be able to hear them. So I just wanted to go through a little bit of a group agreement to just set the tone for the space. So I've used this group agreement before. It comes from Adrienne Marie Brown, who I think you may know. So I'm just gonna keep talking. I'm sorry if you can hear my kids screaming and the doorbell going. Okay, great. So the first one is to listen from the inside out. So that's really about listening to your gut and trusting your intuition. So I really encourage you to listen to understand. It's a different way of listening. Also about engaging tensions. So the tension is what creates the space for us to talk. We don't always have to agree, but it's a way for us to put things on the table. So this is another way to say, don't indulge the drama, but do engage with the tension. The next one is I like this one. It's called wait. So ask yourself, why am I talking? What kind of space are you taking up? And what are you saying? So when you take the space, also make the space. So this is a way of saying step up and step back. So you want to help balance the people that speak a lot and those who don't have an opportunity to speak at all. It's not to say that everyone has to, but it's a different way of listening and a different way of being in the space. It also challenges us in the way that colonialism and white supremacy requires or demands us to behave in a particular way. So I really encourage you to step back a bit, perhaps be the last to speak if you're often the first to speak. So in this space is also confidentiality. So I often ask people to take the lesson with you, but leave the details and the names away, but take the lesson with you. Be open to learning, be open to someone else speaking your truth. So it's not to say that all of our experience is the same and that all of us are one monolith. We're all come from different places. We're all in a different space in our journey. So just to recognize that and to listen to that with an open heart. So we're also building, we're not selling. This is not a space to sell a pitch. We're trying to build our knowledge. We're trying to build capacity and build community. It's a different way of creating things. So this means you can be yes and, both and, all. It's not an all or nothing. It's mostly shades of different gray. It's being on the spectrum. It's never one or the other. That's a really difficult space to be in sometimes. I also ask you to value this process and the outcome. So inside this space, we may talk about many things. You may have many ideas. There may be lots of new things to learn, but value that process. This is a space that we need to create. This is the only way we can move forward. Also assume the best intent. Everybody here has the best intentions. So I would really attend. So be mindful of the impact. So that means be thoughtful about the way you are in this space and mindful of what you say. And also about self-care and community care. You know, listen to yourself. If you need to take a break, please by all means do that. I'm sure if you're like me, you've been in Zoom meetings or talking all day to a camera and a screen. So please take care of your body, take care of yourself, and pay attention also to the room and your neighbors and the folks that are in here. So this comes from a blog that I use often. Sorry, I'll put the link in the chat box. Tyson, you have your hand up. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Julie. Many folks should have received in the email the listing there, and thank you so much for taking a deeper dive into what that means. I want to also just comment for those who think about when we talk about online accountability, is ensuring that we have guidelines similar to those that help to set the tone about how we want to treat each other in these spaces. And so, if you're someone who's taking notes and things are coming up for you, inspirations, our tactics, as you go through the next couple of hours here, that might be one of them to begin considering. Am I creating a tone and a setting where people feel that they can connect and communicate and build on those relationships? Other elements of tonight, as I said, we're gonna hear a personal experience about online harassment, and from there we'll begin to have more of a Q&A conversation about various things that we can do and think about from an individual perspective and an organizational perspective as it relates to creating that being more accountable online. And then we will break out into breakout rooms to have a bit more of a discussion about how you're processing this information and what that might look like moving forward. At the end, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other sort of components about online accountability, specifically in racialized spaces, that we need to kind of begin considering and thinking about as well. To that, Julie, is there anything else you wanted to okay. Well, I will go to sort of our first part here which is Wunmi and her story, just of really to help us sort of set the tone of why we're even here today. So thank you, Wunmi.
Thank you, Tyson. So there's a video that I recorded about an incident that happened March 20th at an anti-racism arts festival. Cue the video, please. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to share my story of what happened during the Anti-Racism Arts Festival on March 20th, 2021. The festival was founded by the Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation And the presenters of the festivals were Central Vancouver Island Multicultural Society, and I'll be referring to them as CVIMS. So I was contacted to speak as a panel member, as well as to present on the importance of Africa hair, 2 different events on that same day. The presentation on African hair was focused on the importance of preserving our hair, our culture, and the importance of cornrows and braids, and that was earlier that afternoon. The evening was supposed to be focused on me telling my story about being racialized and being bullied as a Black person, the 28 years I've been in Canada. So we had 3 panel members. There was an Indigenous man, there was an Asian woman, and there was myself. The Indigenous man and the Asian woman had the opportunity to share their stories, and it was my turn. So I did my land acknowledgement, recognizing that I'm on the land, Mohkinstsis in Calgary. And I started to speak about my experiences with racism. And as soon as I started sharing my story, I heard a voice coming from somewhere in the Zoom account, 3 to 4 voices, basically calling my name, swearing at me, and calling me the N-word, yelling the N-word at me, singing the N-word at me, taunting me with the N-word, swearing and putting my name in the sentence and calling me the N-word for about 45 seconds. And at this time, I'm looking at everyone looking at me, looking for a reaction. So I just smiled. And the moderator, Jennifer, looked frantic, and she basically ended the call. So I sat there for about a minute, just trying to grapple what just happened. I called over to my daughters and told them what just happened during this event that was supposed to be an anti-racism festival. After that, I contacted Iman, who is the CEO of the Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation, because she was not in that event, to inform her what just happened, because she's the founder of the festival. So she was shocked that nobody contacted her prior to me contacting her, and is the person that got harmed is one contacting her. So she said she will contact Jennifer, and for me just to, hang on. Jennifer sent me a text message and then called right after to say that she would like to do a debrief and kind of go over what just happened and ask if I'm doing okay. I acknowledged the debrief and I told her I would like that. So she should inform me of when that is. So she was going to send me an email with the Zoom link. I decided to call one of the cultural instigators. I'm a member of the cultural instigators in Calgary, jaqs aquines. So I contacted jaqs and informed her what just happened and asked if she's available to be part of this situation. And they definitely agreed and focused on what I needed. So after the debrief, we spoke about, what happened. They had no clue. They couldn't give us any answers. But they did mention that I should come back for the next event that was scheduled after this discussion. This was like 30 minutes into the discussion when the disruption happened. So they told me to come back in during the film festival to talk about, just address the people who joined and those who might have been part of the previous event, to just address them and let them know what happened in, my own scenario. So I agreed. I took a walk in back and joined back in. I agreed to speak, and I spoke, and I informed those who were there that I am not what they called me, and that, this is why this type of work is very, very important to do, because I didn't even have to say my story. I didn't even have to reiterate anything that has happened to me in this 28 years, that those perpetrators showed what we've been going through, and they were very vocal about it, and they silenced me. So I wasn't even able to share my story. Jennifer started crying during that time. I didn't understand why, because I'm hurt that I was just called those names in an anti-racism event that I'm supposed to be safe. The 2 other panel members were also racialized and they weren't crying. So I was wondering why a white woman would be crying instead of just showing some type of decorum for those who were there. So I did text her to let her know that we can hear you on Zoom. You're not muted, and we can hear that you're crying. And she gave me a thumbs up, and she kept crying. So I left the Zoom call, and I just went and did other things during the day. And I did come back again in the evening after the film festival to answer any questions, but everybody just seemed stunned. So I got off the call. And the following day, Sunday, we had a debrief again with jaqs, CCMF, that's the Canadian Cultural Music Foundation CEO, as well as 2 members of the CVIMS, including Jennifer. And basically just informing her that we definitely need a police report to report this hate. She insinuated that I brought the hate upon myself, that it looked like it was a targeted situation because it was not until I spoke is when this happened. And I had to remind her that I had a whole event, an 1.5-hour event prior to this discussion for the same festival. And it was my event that I was speaking and presenting, and nothing happened. And I found it very, very offensive that she would try to insinuate that I brought this hate upon myself. We basically informed her that anything that had to go out to the press, I needed to confirm the authenticity of everything. And I wanted to ensure that I was part of every step to ensure that the truth came out the way it needed to come out. And since then, they've been avoiding us. No support. Basically, that's all I can say. And I really appreciate jaqs for sending emails on my behalf, because mentally I wasn't capable. Communicating with me, checking up on me on a constant basis. And I also thank BLAC for the care package that they sent to me. That's true allyship. And this is the importance of why this event is needed. Thank you. So that's the story. And just to think about what could have been better, what could have been done better. Feeling vulnerable, feeling violated, feeling degraded, being shut up, I couldn't talk, I was muted. And the increase of online abuse from these perpetrators is something that we need to speak about, and it's something that's real, because now we are left to have only Zoom, online conference, digital events online, and we are basically opening ourselves to be bullied if we are not careful about how we keep that safe space for racialized people. What I also found very upsetting was the fact that during the time that we had the debrief, the CVIMS presenter started crying. Here I am, here the Indigenous and the Asian speaker are listening to her cry while we were just basically part of this hate crime that just happened, and we weren't showing that type of emotion. And she removed herself from video, and you could just hear her sniffling. And when we asked her why she was crying, she basically said it's an emotion. But that to me is white fragility. You are part of the problem if you think it's okay to be crying in a position that other people who are racialized, who are supposed to feel safe, are being hurt and being violated. So I just wanted to put that out there, as that's what happened on March 20th, 2021. The next day was supposed to be the International Day for Racism and Discrimination. So it was very, very interesting how everything happened during a 24-hour period of a day that's supposed to liberate what just happened to me. Thank you very much for everyone for listening. I'm just going to pass it over to Julie to speak about how we can prevent this type of situation.
Thanks, Wunmi, for sharing. I'm so sorry that happened. I would never wish that on anybody. Thank you so much for sharing it. It's really important, I think, that people hear your story. So I just want to say like a few things around preparing for these kinds of meetings. And as a facilitator, I've facilitated many online meetings. There's always preparations that you can take. For example, you saw the waiting room. There's all those sort of technical things. And then as a facilitator, you know, you're sort of responsible for the space. So as a facilitator who has been part of those spaces, I take it quite seriously about how the direction goes and who's admitted and what they have to say. So I'm sorry that happened, because I feel like that would have been something that would have been really helpful, is for the facilitator to direct that conversation. And like the things that we did for this meeting, for example, is we do have a contingency plan. And we do have a number of people who are supporting in the back end. That's really important. I also think it's really important to think about the platform you decide to use, whether that this is a Zoom meeting or, you know, we're talking about Instagram and other areas of online engagement. I have this feeling or saying about the internet that for some, well, I know for many reasons, but lots of people put things out, but they don't have the same face-to-face engagement as you would in sort of in person. So there's less, it's sort of like you're less removed from it. So you can put anything onto the internet, but like, you know, things have been floating around there for a long time and they just keep cropping up. So there's that as well. And then, you know, the other few other things I wanted to say about preparing is that it's really important to set some kind of guideline. So why are we in this space? What are we doing? You know, to be able to call us back, the facilitator to call us back to that agreement, to say, look, you know, this isn't what we agreed on. And so then there's a consequence for that. So those are kinds of some of the things that I would suggest taking a look at or thinking through before you decide you're going to do all these kinds of online engagements. I'm not quite sure if I need to say anything else, but I think it's really important to think about the technology and the platform you're using. A lot of people just go, oh, well, we're just using Zoom. Well, you know, as we're in charge of the technology, so we tell it what to do when we make those choices. So as a facilitator, I think it's your responsibility, or a group of facilitators, to be responsible for the technology. It's kind of like if you were to do this face-to-face, it'd be like having all the doors and windows open, or just, you know, letting whoever come in whenever and make whatever ruckus. Like you would never do that in a face-to-face meeting. So anyway, some of those things I really invite you to think about when you're planning online meetings. It helps a lot to take the technical part out of the meeting and really focus on why are you meeting and what is the purpose. Okay, well, I feel like I've talked a lot. So Tyson, I'm not sure what section's next.
Well, I did want to just really make that comment about what Julie, what you said about you know, if this was in person, and it's been a year and a half since I've been anywhere where most conversations we would have as a housekeeping rule, where the exits are, where the washrooms are, what you need to do in order to when you leave that space, and thinking, and I think that applies very much to being online. So what does that look like? And to your point, we have a contingency plan of how we want to ensure people's people were as safe as possible in case of something happening, similar to Wunmi's experience, or other types of discriminatory behavior.
Thanks, Tyson. Yeah, so I just would say, I really encourage people to really think that through. A lot of people don't think that through. We just, you know, we kind of get, it's a pandemic, so we got thrown onto this thing where we're going to meet online, right? So it's like, just find whatever you can so we can kind of continue on some semblance of normalcy. But I think it's actually an opportunity to rethink how we get together, what our outcomes can be, and how we can do things differently. We don't have to meet the same way we had when we were in person. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Can I just invite one person to give a message to Wunmi? Tim?
Yeah, hi, sorry. Just really grateful, Wunmi, for you sharing that story. And as you were sharing, I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and I sent Kinya a message. I'm like, I feel called to go camera on, just so that you feel and you see that we're listening and we're hearing you. I think one of the challenges in this virtual time is this disconnection. And so I know an invitation that I often offer for virtual gatherings, I just encourage people to go camera on. It's just hard. And I just wanted to express that you were heard. I was listening. I also didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable by just having my face appear to you, just considering everything that you had just gone through and shared. But I just felt called to message Kinya, and I'm like, someone needs to turn their camera on, for crying out loud, because she is sharing a really important story, and she needs to feel like she's being heard. So just wanted to share that.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you, Tim. So I would like to also share another type of cyberbullying that happened on April the 9th. I don't know why it's happening to me, but I guess it is. So I have to ensure that I share it. So there was a situation that happened with a producer taking $20,000 that I was supposed to use for a documentary that focused on the Black artists that I work with and the impact that my productions and events that I create in Calgary has on them. It was a Story Hive grant that we got, and the producer I've never really worked with, but they assisted us with the festival we had in September for Alberta Cultural Days. So the producer basically derailed me from being part of the documentary and took the $20,000 and decided to do something different with it by undermining me and gaslighting me to Story Hive, letting them know that I'm not a serious person. And those who know me know that I'm very particular about what I do. I'm always a planner. I'm always forth-thinking. And it was really painful because I was basically chasing down this producer to let me know what's next. And it was very depressing to have gone through the situation March 20th with CVIMS and then be dealing with that situation then too. So my board and the communities of artists who were supposed to be part of this documentary told me to put a statement out, like, this is not right. A Black man silencing a Black woman from having her story told. And this name of the project was She Leads, Making a Way for Black Artists. So I decided to put that out there on Facebook and Instagram. And I got a lot of sympathizers. And within 30 minutes, I just got bombed by different accounts that had like 2-3 followers that were calling me the N-word. They were swearing at me. They were telling me to go back to Africa. They were letting me know I was just a common slave. It was really bad. And then to top it off, a Black youth collective group, I guess they're a call-out group in Calgary, basically started sending messages on their story and on their page about me, and telling me that's my fault, that this is what I've done to other Black youth, Black women. I steal ideas. They called me a coon. They told me to go back to Africa. And I'm like, wow, this is supposed to be a Black collective group. They have no face. I don't know who these people are. If you have an issue with me, call me, send me an email. This is not the way to do things. And I am all about Black people. Whoever knows me knows I put my community first before anything. So I was very hurt, and I was going into a depressive state at this point because I'm still dealing with CVIMS, and this just happened, and it's Black youth coming after me. I don't know who they are. I don't have a face to the name. And I sought out the community. People were reaching out to them, and they were calling me out like, we're waiting for you to message us. Come on, we're waiting for you. And I was like, who are you? First of all, who are you? And they blocked me too. So I wasn't even able to see what they were writing. I was just getting screenshots sent by members of the community. And I lost a lot of followers because of the lies that they put out. And the next day, another group continued the rhetoric on their social media, Instagram page, on their story. And the same thing, calling me out, saying I'm a fake Black person. I'm not really about the community. I'm just pretending. And it went on for another full day. So 48 hours of hate online with no censor, abusing and gaslighting me. And I don't have a face. I don't have a name. I don't have an understanding of who these people are. And that just threw me to a different level of depression and different level of just thinking like, okay, this is the community I'm supposed to be serving, but look what they're doing to me right now. So that's another opportunity for us to think about how we are directing conversations online and how it's affecting people. I'm grateful. I'm a person that has 2 beautiful daughters that constantly confirm who I am. They see me on a daily basis, and they see how much I work, sometimes 80 hours a week for the Black community. So they just kept reassuring me, and I had a lot of people calling me, leaders of the communities. Casey Madu contacted me, and I just felt a little bit better. People were just rallying around me, and I still don't know who these people are. And it's so unsafe knowing that people can just wake up one day and decide just to derail your career, derail your accountability, derail your recognition baselessly. So I wanted to put that out there too, that this just happened April the 9th. Thank you.
Wunmi, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I can sense that the rest of the room also really is in a space of empathy right now, because what you shared was really hard. And so I want to appreciate how brave you've been to show up today to share your story. And for the folks in the room, the reminder is to watch out for things like this. And I'm going to talk about gaslighting in a second here. We've heard this term mentioned. I'm going to get into a bit of a definition of what that looks like to help you all identify when you are being gaslit, when you are gaslighting, as well as a few key strategies on how to control and maintain that, maintain your composure if you need to in the moment, but at very best, you should be vulnerable to what you're experiencing. But before we do that, I would just like to invite everybody into a little bit of a grounding right now as we're holding space for Wunmi. If you are able to have both your feet on the ground and just be present to the earth that you're on. Be thankful, Treaty 13, where I am right now, Treaty 7, where most of you are, Treaty 6, some of you. And just be present right now and take a deep breath in. Let's all just kind of like do a one deep breath in, one of gratitude, and out. And just know that as much as we can in this moment, we are in a safe space. And we will do what we can to ensure that. So Wunmi, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about gaslighting. And I will share my screen here to show you a quick snapshot of what gaslighting looks like. Okay, so I'm just keeping it on this view right now. So these are some of the signs of gaslighting. Okay, so first of all, it is a form of manipulation and abuse concentrated on making someone doubt their reality. So as you heard Wunmi say, she was starting to wonder what all these things are, how are all these things happening right now, right? This is a way that you are able to identify that you are being gaslit. And usually it feels like you have to defend your reality, right? And when it comes to online interactions and you're facing this, you're starting to wonder, did what I say make sense? Did it make sense? And for a lot of people, you're also asking yourself, how did I come to this place where people feel offended or that they felt that they needed to offend me? Gaslighting is also, on the other spectrum, is denying conversations or events ever happened. Now, in my next slide here, these are some of the examples of what gaslighting looks like. So trivializing, right? People are minimizing your feelings and suggesting that your emotions don't matter. And the last one here is withholding. So brushing off your attempts to have a discussion or accuse you or trying to confuse them. And so it was very clear when Wunmi explained about the whole ghosting incident that this here is how gaslighting is activated in our spaces. So how do you feel when you're being gaslit? You doubt yourself, you question yourself, you find yourself apologizing frequently sometimes, you're struggling with decision making. Who should I involve? Who should I talk to? Where should I go with this information? And you generally feel unhappy, confused, and unlike your usual self. And it's quite likely sometimes that you will start to dip into a space of depression. So check yourself when you start to experience some of these things. You also start to avoid loved ones because you don't really know how to explain what is going on. There are a lot of things that you're unpacking in the moment. I will jump into the next part about how we should handle it. So this is really important, folks. Take space from the situation, step back, unpack what just happened. Collecting evidence is very important. So screenshot, have any recordings if something has happened in a virtual space that had a recording. Even a voice recording sometimes is good, and this is usually to help you prepare yourself in case you need to litigate. It also helps you share with other people who would be able to advocate for you, and they need to have a background of what's going on. Speak up about their behavior. So when Wunmi, you spoke out about what happened on your live, I know it took a lot of courage for you to do that, but the effect of that has actually gotten us to this space today when we can actually share in these pieces. So thank you so much. And I'm sorry that we've had to learn from such a painful experience, but I'm encouraged that this particular experience is going to motivate us to do better in our communities and to serve people that we serve online with more diligence. And here's one that I really want us to hone in on just focusing on self-care. Self-care is really important. Spend time with safe friends. And the reason why I say safe friends here is because not everybody will understand. Sometimes when we share incidences of gaslighting with people in our circles who are not necessarily safe, we also get gaslit as a result of that. So be very clear and specific about who you're going to share this information with in that moment. Practice daily affirmations, right? Wunmi, you are strong, right? Remind yourself that for you to be able to share this, you also have to really be very proactively positive about yourself and your experiences. That was supposed to be meditation, although mediation is another tactic, but get into moments where you are grounding yourself in that moment. And journaling could help in several ways. For one, you're able to keep a record of accounts, because sometimes when you're traumatized, we tend to forget certain events as they happened. So journaling helps for that one reason. And journaling is also very cathartic. So if you are a person who likes to journal and who likes to put your thoughts on paper, I encourage you to do that when you're experiencing the emotional turmoil around gaslighting. Seek professional support. There's definitely techniques that could be used to support you by the help of a social worker, an elder, or a registered psychotherapist as well, and involve other people. So for you folks as allies of someone who is undergoing this experience of being gaslit, I urge you to take the lead from the person who was affected. Before you jump into the supportive pieces, seek out from the person who was affected and ask them, what are some of the things I could do to support you in this moment? And as Wunmi explained, getting the support from allies like Iman and jaqs was really helpful in her journey to get to where she is right now to share her story. So these are just some of the things that I would like to offer you. And if we have time, there is a video that we could watch, but I would just encourage if the host could just put that in the chat box and you can go unpack this video with this information on gaslighting. Over to you, Tyson. Thank you.
I'd like to also mention, thank you so much, Kinya, that I also tried to contact Instagram and report them as a hate speech. And they basically told me that it wasn't a hate speech and they let it go. And I didn't feel supported with them either, because you can definitely see that they're calling me names. You know, the N-word was said, coon, you know, what, Uncle Tom, like all those type of names were used. And, you know, I wanted to ensure that somebody could support to shut down this page because of that, you know, real-time situation, because they could read it. It was a 24-hour story, and it's probably still on their site right now. And yet, my 8 attempts to Instagram, they kept telling me that it was not violating any of their guidelines. So that was very disappointing also. Thank you. Over to you, Tyson.
Thank you, Wunmi. When this was brought to my attention, the incident that discussing incidents that have happened, and we started talking about what does that look like for accountability. And it feels at times from our conversation and the conversation we've had leading up to this event of, well, what's next? What does that look like? And I think even from sort of from a structural level around Instagram, for example, and we've seen this even just yesterday and today with missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls, where things are, responsibility isn't being taken, and how do we create a community of care around incidences like this when the current structure, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, these platforms aren't able to take the kind of care and due diligence. And sometimes it feels like it's these things happen often enough where I feel like, how do we begin to take back some of where we as the public, I guess, can be held responsible for these incidents that do happen. What can we do to support and show care? So we do want to talk a little bit about that as well moving forward. But I do thank you, Wunmi, for being able to speak to your power and to your story. So thank you very much. There is a comment here that I just want to mention as well from Alana, which was the platforms, especially Instagram and Facebook, allow for this gaslighting to continue. And so, and how do we create, thinking about how we create content to also combat that as well, is also just as important as well. So we want to go into a little bit of a Q&A portion. There's a couple of things we want to talk about how we can show that sense of community of care. And really, the first thing for me when I think of what that support can look like is reaching out to the individual, and in online or otherwise, asking what kind of support they need, because oftentimes that isn't always immediate. That the feelings, the sense of what to do next isn't always recognizable at the time, and so being able to be there, being open to being able to express that you are there for them and what that can look like, and really trying to center the experience of the person who is harmed and what their needs are. Julie, do you have anything that you wanted to talk about as it relates to sort of what individuals can do?
Sure. I just wanted to just follow up a little bit about what you just said. Yeah. I also often in these spaces and these times we become quite reactionary. Yes. And I would really invite you to step back and ground yourself before moving forward in any kind of reaction or response. I'm a big fan of waiting, waiting, and also silence, because there is no obligation for you to respond. I do think it's purposeful and with good intention if you wait and just become grounded first. And then sometimes in that space, you can also understand what exactly is that person like really wanting to do, and what is the intention behind it. It's a little bit of taking the drama out of that kind of reaction. I don't know what else to call it, but it's quite charged, you know, like I myself have often just not posted anything or just walked away from my phone for at least an hour, which seems like a million years, right? Online time. And often people are very compelled to respond. So sometimes the silence and the pause makes people squirm. And I enjoy that sometimes because you can really find out what exactly are they looking for. Yes, I agree with the comment in the chat box that urgency is a characteristic of white supremacy. So I always remind myself of that. It's really hard though, because it really like the fire that burns in the bottom of my gut that wants to do something isn't sometimes something that I should let out. The other thing I just wanted to put out is to think about your posts and your creation of your own social media feeds. What do you repost? And what is your intent behind it? I think that's something to think about. Is this really in solidarity or is it performative? The performative nature that I experience and I see online is all the time. So I think there's an opportunity often to rethink how do we engage. I really appreciate the way you say, Tyson, like to reach out. It just reminds me of the way, Tim, that you also reached out earlier. I think that goes a long way. It brings back the humanity into this technology and this space where I feel like it's really missing. And we don't acknowledge that. I feel like the white supremacy really moves us forward to be, we must keep doing this the way we are. So I think stepping back and pausing and also just letting ourselves feel, especially in this time and space, if we were all in a room, the energy would be so different. And I could see your faces and the way you breathe and the energy that we bring. But because we're online, it's so hard. And also, we're all dealing with all the things that we have all day. So anyway, so I just wanted to invite you to think about those things. Just like, who are you serving when you use your social platform? And what are you posting? Thanks, Tyson.
Thank you, Julie. I'm curious if there are any maybe questions, one or two about your individual experience as it relates to the creation of your feed or how you post. I know oftentimes for myself, I'm not probably as into social media as maybe others, I think anyway, but I do find that there can be often times where you begin to see all of the same kind of posts. It feels trendy after a while, where you're seeing the same sort of sentiment, and it might be coming from a place of solidarity, but also it also comes from a place of potential privilege as well, where you might be able to see often these things and it doesn't actually affect you. And so for myself, I know there's been countless times over the years where my feed would be full of Black tragedy, Black guilt, and murder, and knowing that how do I create space away from that? And oftentimes, similar to what Wunmi has said, it is that taking that self-care. But I often think, how much of this pollution do people just put out there without maybe considering those people that follow them or their friends on these online spaces as well?
Can I add a thought, Tyson?
Yeah, of course.
I was just thinking about the insight you shared about reaching out to an individual and checking and sort of just connecting with them. And I've done that recently, and so the reason why I think that is so important is because I feel like we're so socialized to try to fix or try to address moments of despair or moments of vulnerability. And so I work with an Indigenous woman in leadership, an amazing person. And I have worked with this individual for a few years now. And in the beginning of our relationship, she holds a leadership position, and there would be moments where she would have a vulnerable moment and she would express that. She trusted in our relationship early enough to cry and to do all this kind of stuff. And unconsciously, my characteristic of white supremacy to fix and to like come to her aid and like, reach out came into play without me even knowing it. Until about like halfway into our relationship, she just sort of called that out. And she's like, Tim, I just need you to know that I can have a vulnerable moment and I can cry, but I don't need you to come and like try to offer me anything, because I can get right back into my leadership. That's where I'm at in my own healing journey. And I thought about that and I'm like, yeah, totally, because I'm the same way. I can have a vulnerable moment in front of people if it's a space that I'm holding, And I don't need people to come to me because I'm far enough in my healing journey to know that that's normal. It should be normal. I think we need to get rid of this negative stigma about people shedding tears or having vulnerable moments and all that kind of stuff. So really important to just like check in with that person if they're like in tears, because they could be totally fine. And that's healing. I get so many teachings from elders, and elders would say, let those tears come because that's Creator's antibiotics for us. And it does really feel good after I have a good cry sometimes. Just thought I'd share that.
Thank you for sharing, Tim. I appreciate that. I think I appreciate that. Thank you. There is a question in the chat by Cesar that I think we can talk to about in a little bit here about sort of that lateral violence that does happen. I want to quickly just sort of talk about sort of what does it look like to be principled as it relates to an organization, and so specifically around public statements. And I don't want to, we're going to spend a little bit more time on this, but I think, but we have seen over the last, last year especially, statements around being an anti-racist organization. And some have gotten feedback online about what does that actually look like? What does that mean? What's the experience of the people that you're about? Have you actually centered the experience of racialized people who are engaged, whether that's staff or customers or the public, as it relates to the product or the service that you're selling? And so an example that I think is quite prominent, perhaps maybe in Canada, but specifically around the football team in Edmonton, for example, and the name that they use, that they choose to use, and lots of questions about, well, what does it mean for you to be anti-racist, to create a space that is that isn't on the backs of indigenous people, and asking, and I think that for me, the comments and the feedback around that, for me, that what I heard and how I think a lot of various different organizations should begin to maybe look at is, what do we do, and what does it mean for us to actually make that change? How we actually centered that public statement around the experiences of racialized folks that we want to say that we are creating a safer space for. And I think, and sometimes we just do that and put it on online platform and hope for the best. Hope that people read it and they agree that that's what we're going to, that we believe these things in a performative way, similar to what Julie said about, is this solidarity or is it performance? Where are our principles here? Do they line up? And so thinking about within your own organization, as you may have or want to do, what those look like, and even further to that, what does apologizing look like as well? Public statements of apology as well. In that same vein, has it been centered around the people that are most impacted? Is there any questions by chance?
There's a question here about how can we better address white friends who emulate performative allyship online consistently with the black square, and they defend it when you bring it up that they're being performative because of the work that they do, attending protests, having black friends, even working in an anti-oppressive led organization. So how to better address that? So I will respond from the perspective of calling in someone, and the fact that being anti-racist is about, it's not just about showing, it's really all about being and doing, because some people say it's not really about being, it's about doing, but I think it's really all about how you show up in a very intentional way. And it doesn't have to be shouting at the mountaintops about you buying this t-shirt on Facebook that says, you know, Black Lives Matter, as much as it is, what are you really doing to show that Black lives do matter? And that could include supporting a friend who's going through something like this, even though you don't fully understand what they've been through, but your presence showing up is enough. Performative actions, for the most part, are very temporary, and they will be covered up by the next thing that shows up. When you're actually doing and making meaningful impact in someone's life, you really don't need to share it and talk about it and shout about it. So I think my encouragement is, if you want to talk to friends, let them also understand the optics of being an ally or an accomplice and what that really should look like. I don't know if there's anybody else who has something to add on that.
There is a question from San, who asks about what we did, and so a couple of things that we did was, one was we looked at the participant list beforehand. So most of you would have gotten. I'd asked for your names to be the same, for example, when you came on here, because the reality is, and that sense of anonymity that happens online, trying to control, to manage that was a really important part of this. I think second to that was, we as the organizers had quite a few conversations about what does this actually look like. We're jumping a little bit ahead, but we talked about what does consent mean in this space. We asked for consent, but we also asked, we said, should we have messaging happening? What does it look like to have breakout rooms, as we will go into here shortly? Ensuring that there's folks who the organizers are in the know of how we are going to work together, and ensuring that everyone feels safe. Another thing that we specifically around the organizers and panelists as a priority. And then I think, and once again, mistakes do happen. That video that Kinya filmed earlier for us, the nature behind that was to be able to have some emotional distance from the actual event, and in our conversation in between the freezing, it was a question of, would you like us to move forward with the video, and or would you like to take that space up in live, so to speak. So I think that there's a lot of permission that has to be asked as we begin to sort of think about what happens online. There are so many of these technical things that play a huge component into how we relate to one another, that I think the more we ask for permission, the more safer it will be for those. And because you also have a lot of people on, maybe on mass than you would otherwise. So that's also incredibly important. I wanted to allow some time for Julie to talk a little bit more about community care and the current and really unfortunate ongoing space around anti-Asian hate that has been going on, what that looks like as relates to community of care.
Thanks, Tyson. Before we go on to that, I just noticed that Tim put something in the chat box, some questions about holding space. I just wanted to go back a little bit about holding space. It's not something that we're shown from a colonialist point of view, or from, like, white supremacy does not allow for holding space. So what am I trying to say in this? So often when we find ourselves in these spaces, yes, like the need for us to fix and solve problems is always, that's definitely, I feel like that's, in my experience, something that people are always driven to, like, what's the problem? We can find a solution together. And I think there's also great power and great knowledge in sitting in your emotion for a bit. I say this to my children all the time because they want me to solve their problems. And I always say, I know you're really upset. So sit in that for a minute. Think about what is happening inside you? And what is that? Where do you want to put that? And sort of start to unpack that, because that's a little bit of why we don't move on sometimes, is we don't unpack it. We just compartmentalize it, all of those emotions. It's really important to be in touch with all of that. I think often we're so taught to just not be vulnerable, not to cry, not to feel any kind of emotion. So that's a lot of new practicing sometimes, and it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to watch somebody be uncomfortable. But in the greatest moments, that is probably the kindest, most difficult place to be with someone else. Okay, so I'll let that go. What I did want to talk a little bit about was community care, and how we show community care. So I'm sure you've all heard of the anti-hate crimes that have been happening. I mean, it's been around, in Canada for some time, and you've probably seen some things online. For me, it's really hard for me to watch those videos or see them when they clog my feed. I value so much our elders in our community that it really hurts me to see that some people would repost that, as though, I know they probably feel like they're sharing the information, but that's another way of re-traumatizing our community. So that's just something to think about. And then also about how we take care of each other. So that whole checking in, and also learning how to be with each other in a different way. This is a different way of being with each other, right? We can't be in the same room, but we are online. So how do we show solidarity online in our socialized platform, on our social media platforms? That's something also to really think about. And that's this is something that I've noticed ever since the Black Lives Matter has really gained illumination, is that there's a lot of cross-racial support. For example, the rally that was, I can't even remember when that was, I think the beginning of March or end of March, that was in Calgary. I think there was a series of rallies that were held across Canada. I was really touched by the amount of people that were, touched isn't really the word I would say. I was really impressed by the number of people that chose to show up and chose to show their solidarity. So I think that's changing. That's something that I have noticed. People are more willing to reach out. So something around those lines, I just wanted to bring that up. That's another way of community care. So I'd really encourage you to do that. I was just noticing a couple of comments in the chat box there about that we've been socialized, for quick fixes. I think that's part of the white supremacist culture, where we want everything to be quick, fast, and can't stop. It's part of the capitalism too. Somebody's losing money somewhere somehow if we don't hurry up and do something. So in the community care, I really would challenge us and really invite us to rethink about what that looks like, and how do we move forward without changing, and with changing the way business as usual. Why can't it be different? It has never maintained us, so why should we continue to do it? So anyway, I'll stop. I think we're getting ready for our next section.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Julie. We're now going to get into breakout rooms so we can have a little bit of time to unpack some discussions here, and we will do that via a Jamboard. So all the facilitators that will be moving with you into the breakout rooms will post a link to the Jamboard and invite everybody's interaction on this Jamboard. We will use some of this information to inform a tool that we will develop from this particular interaction tonight to be able to support all the people who attended this on how to support other people when gaslighting is happening online. So I also want to just acknowledge that for those of you folks who are sitting in this call on a Friday night, we really just want to honor the fact that you're spending some valuable time learning some valuable tools. And so we are really appreciative of your presence here. So the breakout rooms are ready, I have been informed, and so you are going to quickly be assigned into a breakout room. And the question is, how or what are the ways you engage with online social media platforms? How are you showing up? So we're going to take some time to talk about that, talking about how you show up on your online feed. And yeah, big shout out to Sky, who's actually the person who will be collecting this information, and they will be sharing this in a very beautiful tool afterwards. So jaqs, we are ready to go, and facilitators, please grab your link from the Google Drive and paste it on. And these small groups are not going to be recorded. When we are done, we'll get a prompt to return to the main room, and we will take it from there and wrap up. Thank you.
So we have about 20 more minutes here. I wanted to actually get back to a question that Cesar had raised earlier on in the chat. Cesar, would you mind? It was about sort of the lateral violence that you mentioned. Do you want to kind of reframe that for us?
Sure, thanks, Tyson. What I put in was how can we address conflicts within our communities in authentic, equitable, and empowering ways.
Right.
So that while we deal with the conflicts, we don't fall into that insidious situation of being divided while we try to create solidarity, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Cesar. Well, I don't always have the answers for that at all. I definitely don't. But what I wanted to respond with is a couple of things that came up for me when you asked that question. And one was sort of tied into elements around anti-Asian hate and specifically actually where a lot of individuals from the Black community have actually perpetrated some of these incidences that have happened. And it's a dialogue around what have we maybe become in the potential experiences of why that might be the case, and begin to unpack that. And that for me is a very uncomfortable conversation to have. And some of this conversation has actually been placed offline, even though it's been centered around online because of people posting certain things or questioning this or that, and being willing to engage with some of those really difficult conversations around why that is, that where that prejudice is coming from within folks that I might know, who might be going like, what does this all mean? What does this look like? Or why is this happening? And to begin to engage on that. And it's in the Jamboard notes, but Jordan, who was in my breakout room, had brought up a really valid point about discussions about these things and how we post things, and between racialized communities, and understanding, and what I got from his knowledge around this was being open and willing to continue to have those conversations as maybe different generations understand these things, or what the headlines, I guess, of the content. You know, there's maybe a particular way of understanding these things, and it oftentimes it's very performative in its response. Yet it's a one type of understanding about what's going on culturally. And so if you're a racialized person who maybe doesn't understand or can't maybe resonate with certain experiences, I'm going, well, how do I communicate what's happening for me? And being able to create a space, online or otherwise, that can begin to host those conversations and uncomfortable conversations that are further than just what is being trending.
If I could just add two really quick things to what you just said, Tyson, and to respond to the issue of lateral violence, which is something that we're really starting to see more of these days. The first thing is trauma begets trauma, right? So as people who are on the margins, equity seeking, equity deserving people, we are also carrying racial trauma within us. Now, failure to identify and understand that trauma for several reasons would also cause us to react in a way that would be traumatic to someone else. So this is something that I'm finding too with a lot of immigrant communities. I'm finding this as well with other racialized communities as well. It's just, and also with indigenous communities as well, is that once we, and this is absolutely no justification for lateral violence, but it is an engine and a mechanism to which people tend to channel that trauma. So racial trauma, that's one element. And the other element is, yes, internalized racism would be the other thing as well. As well as white supremacy has set us up for internal battles with each other, right? It's that competition, and it's that bigger is more. So I want to show up as the person of color who does a certain thing in a certain way and tear other people down as well. So that's, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge. And I feel like a lot of these conversations would probably be unpacked best within racial communities, because the danger of really exploring that in a mixed group is there'll be lots of unresolved feelings that are not necessarily safe to completely unpack. And so my urge to the folks on this who work with other racialized folks is just to encourage people to caucus in those groups to really just understand and unpack why lateral violence shows up. The one other thing that I would like to say too is something that I have seen out of my experience being an immigrant in Canada was I grew up with the privilege of not necessarily understanding what racism was, because when I grew up in Kenya, which is where I'm originally from, everybody looks like me, right? So I never really had that experience until I immigrated here as an adult and understood exactly what racism was. So when folks are coming from a background like that, and then coming here to kind of, I want to say, vicariously experience what other people are experiencing, and people who've grown up facing racism and building all these resiliencies. And as a newcomer, I'm like, I came here, I worked hard, I don't see what the problem is because I haven't had that background. That is one of the platforms for that lateral violence, just the previous understanding and experience of it. So it's something for us to be aware of as well as we get into these conversations of lateral violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim here had said, and to be aware when settler created systems and people try to have racialized communities work against each other or compete, just being aware of that and amplifying the power of co-liberation and collective diversity, a collective difference in collective diversity in all of our difference. And I think that actually, you know, Kinya, when you mention about the racial caucusing piece, I don't have any resources around this for those who are sort of thinking, what does that racialized space look like? Because currently, you know, I think it is also important to have those conversations as well in spaces that are for racialized people within your community that you want to engage with, versus I think maybe Instagram or other areas where the exposure to being unsafe is much higher, and you know, it doesn't take long for something like that to be shared and to go to places maybe where it doesn't need to be as well. So there's a lot of and that sense of, I think too, around that anonymity piece can be helpful for some, but also can leave people really, really vulnerable to saying, as we know, saying things and doing things that they wouldn't, of course, do privately. And so the more that we could be able to see a face to that, I think in places that don't feel very safe, the better. So we do have about 10 more minutes left. I did want to just briefly summarize a little bit of some considerations, what we had to do to keep unpacking for this current event. And we really started with the comment around this is our new normal. It feels like, and I use normal this way, but and how we want to address certain things. And so we are all learning how to navigate this. And it was and that sentiment was sort of said earlier from Julie about how we had to respond and react. And this is where we've decided to land, and not all the time of maybe thinking about what this means for us as we engage. And we've talked quite a bit about the last couple of hours as it relates to how to show up for each other, the consequences of being in these spaces, and the vulnerability that it sometimes lends to. But knowing that that part of this is, I think, of an overall culture of us having to react and respond quite quickly to this new path that we're on, and giving ourselves a little bit of a as organizers, think about, okay, well, how have we gotten here? The second part that we were thinking about oftentimes, and I mentioned this around consent, was the various ways in which we wanted people to respond, and the ways in which how people feeling unsafe in these spaces online tend to be an experience like Wunmi. Wunmi, where someone was let in without double checking or seeing what that looked like, to someone saying something that was based in ignorance or white fragility, and knowing that there's that spectrum, and how much do we want people to be exposed to people's questions or challenges, and knowing and being okay with, and us as organizers being, what are we able and capable of handling in the moment as it comes up, and ensuring that there's opportunities to debrief an experience that was making people feel unsafe, if they're open to doing that, and back again to permission. And then we talked a little bit about platform, and really thinking about what kind of platform do we want to use. And there were, I mean, it seemed like we just went with the one that's the most common, but we did think often about, okay, well, there are various other platforms that do exist that allow for us to think about safety, consent differently as well, and the different mechanisms in those platforms that you can use to think about. I just want to give a little bit of time to the other panelists if they have anything else that they wanted to mention.
I would like to maybe invite someone from our group to just share what some of the insights were in our group. I'm looking at you, Malia.
I was just saying to Tristan, I was like, we spoke about so many things, holy smokes. I'll touch on as much as I can. Our group, please jump in as you will, just in case I'm forgetting anything. So I think we initially started off just talking about in terms of social media sharing. It sounded like there was a commonality of being really intentional about where the source is coming from, what it is, what's the purpose of sharing, and who is it for. I had spoke to, and I think other people had mirrored the same language around strictly posting BIPOC sources. And I had mentioned specifically that I like to post BIPOC sources from Canada and specifically around Mohkinstsis to ensure that I'm also like addressing what's going on within the Calgary community and what's happening here, but also just addressing Canada as a whole, as we have like a really, in Canada, there's just like a lot of obsession around Americanized politics and social issues. So making sure that we bring like the BIPOC issues that are happening here to focus. There was lots of conversation around compassion and compassion holding in terms of both call-ins and call-outs. As we know, there's such a fine line into like when is the right opportunity for a call-out and when is the right opportunity for a call-in. So lots of reflection on that. What am I missing? Does anyone want to jump in about things I'm missing? We had a really great discussion.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I'll just add one last thing. I just really liked what Valerie said about just sharing joy as much as possible. And yeah, that really just stuck with me. So thank you, Valerie.
Hi, Jenna. Would you like to share what we spoke about in group 2? Thank you.
Sorry, I was just getting somebody to not be speaking for a second. So I'll do my best at to capture what we kind of talked about. And like Malia was saying, if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free to do so. But I started off with just kind of talking about centering other people's voices. But there were some other really more meaningful, I find, statements made, and I'm just kind of referencing the sticky notes, if that's okay. Like, for instance, being aware of the post that can be traumatizing or triggering. I thought it was very insightful when on Facebook, let's say, we're going through the comments, and you can be engaging in discussions in the comments, and when they start getting more unproductive, let's say, potentially going off the public platform, which can be traumatizing for people to see, and taking it into a private setting. I thought that was very powerful, something to do, and a good tool. And then Eddie, I think, yeah, Eddie's still here. They talked about de-escalating and how to respond. And I think, yeah, they were talking about pulling into private chat spaces and stuff like that. And acknowledgement, consent, permission, those are also things discussed as well. I hope I captured that pretty well.
I'll just add one more thought from our group too. And this wasn't my thought, so I hope they don't mind me sharing as well. But Eddie also shared the importance of content warnings for sharing articles, like triggering articles. So not just content warning, sharing the link, but content warning, ... so that people have the choice to click on that or not. I thought was really insightful and a good reminder.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. I'm really excited to see what Sky is able to produce for us as it relates to conversations that we had here this evening. I did want to mention as well, if you would like to send any care package is to Wunmi and engage in support further for them. You can reach out at this email I put in the chat here as well. And I really want to encourage folks when thinking just about about the value of creating a culture of community of care. And it's really about acknowledging past harms, humility, knowing how we as an organization or as an individual can contribute to hurtful dynamics, and the scope of influence. So what do they need, and how can you provide? And by they, I mean the folks who have been harmed. And that ultimately an outcome of community care is creating a space where those who are feeling impacted by for our conversation, racism, find refuge and safety, and knowing that that's an indicator of community of care, and really that reframing of what can I do to, here's what I can do if that's what you need. So thank you very much for engaging with us this afternoon, or this evening, sorry. And I really hope that this has been a liberating conversation about what you can do, and thinking a little bit further as well around what's next for you. And so thank you very much. And thank you, Wunmi, so much for being able to be so willing to share your story with us today and help us ground in this conversation.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.